Yesterday, when the Prime Minister was asked in question time why sanctions hadn't been implemented in response to the Iranian regime killing women and girls, the Prime Minister said, quote, "One of the things we have done is make sure that any action that's taken, that we're fully cognisant of the implications for Australian business of that." Minister, why
the
did
Australian, sorry?
that we're fully cognisant of the implications for Australian business of that. Minister, why did the Prime Minister link this delay in action with the consideration of business implications?
Can I first start with, you said you wanted to talk about Iran. And I want to start with, because I think on this it is useful for us to make sure we are joined in our articulation. I'm sure I speak for all senators when I say Australians condemn the violent crackdown on protesters. We condemn the death of Mahsa Amini, whose Kurdish name was Jinnah, and other women and girls at the hands of the regime. We condemn those actions as reprehensible, and we have called for those responsible to be held to account. Consistent with this, we have sought both directly and at all levels of our government, including publicly and through multilateral fora, to assert those principles, the condemnation of the violence, calling for an end to the oppression of women. From the Prime Minister, who's made public statements, to myself, to our officials and actions here in Australia and also in UN, in the context of the UN. So I think that is the framework that I would articulate. You asked specifically about sanctions, and one of the things I think it's important for us to think about and consider, and certainly it's something I want more engagement and discussion on as foreign ministers. What do you do in a world? Well, let's start first principles. We take the world as it is, but we seek to shape it for the better. Human rights is a key part of that. How do we promulgate that? How do we best act to assert our views about human rights in the broad and in the specific? In a world where, let's be honest, a great many countries do not share our views, and including, there are different regimes and different views in our region. So I think, for me, there's a sort of a series of tools. One is the power of the word, so you speak clearly, consistently. The other is what you do with your development program. You seek to empower civil society, you try to alleviate suffering, but also structural barriers to gender equality. One of the things we announced in the election was doing the right thing on the Modern Slavery Act, because there are human rights concerns in a number of countries about slavery, and it includes targeted sanctions for those responsible for human rights abuse. But they will only ever be one of our tools to promote human rights, and I think our job is to think about the broad way in which we can engage to try and, as I said, shape the world for the better, recognising that that is always a work in progress.
Sure.
So I think the Prime Minister has made clear his views about not only the death of Mahsa Amini, but also the oppression of women and the targeting of protesters. So I don't know if Mr. Innes-Brown could add to that.
Well, I'd say that, we, as the Minister said, we've been very active in making clear our deep concern about what's been going on. The Minister herself has made two important statements and has also delivered a range of a number of social media messages. And as the Minister said in multilateral fora, we've made statements in both the Human Rights Council and also in New York at the UN and on other platforms on at least 6 occasions since this violence erupted. I would also add that I've called in the Iranian chargé d'affaires on 3 occasions during this period to convey in the strongest terms our concern about what's been happening. I've also spoken to him on another occasion about very concerning reports about intimidation of people here in the community.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that, Ines Brown. I'm glad that you have raised that. And obviously we all agree with the sentiments that the Minister put on the record, and we all condemn the appalling violence, and we've done so very publicly. But I think the local Iranian Australian community in particular is looking for tangible actions. So I do want to go back to that question that the Prime Minister responded to in the House yesterday, and the reference to the consideration of implications of Australian businesses of what we might do. And I'm just interested to know why that linkage was made and what was meant by that linkage.
I mean, I'll let the Prime Minister can speak for himself. I mean, I've just been sent the answer. I have, as well as the Foreign Minister, expressed my abhorrence at the Iranian regime, especially after the tragic killing of Mahsa Amini. What we have seen is a clampdown on the rights of women in Iran. Much of the diaspora here has expressed their abhorrence at this action. We'll continue to work with our allies in multilateral forums such as the UN. I expect this to be a topic raised at meetings I'm attending with global leaders over the coming week. I acknowledge the enormous hurt that Iranian people, but Iranian women in particular, are feeling at this difficult time, watching this clampdown on human rights in Iran. For things we're taking this country for granted. So I think there was quite a lot that he said. He also, ended by saying we'll continue to speak out, we'll continue to vote in any forums in which Australia has a presence to ensure the people of Iran who are showing great courage in standing up for their human rights know that Australia, as always, and in a bilateral, bipartisan way, that Australia is friends of all those who stand up for their individual rights, and in this case in particular, the rights of women. So I think it's, the Prime Minister made his position very clear.
Okay, speaking of our allies, as you did in quoting the Prime Minister just then, I note that the Canadian Foreign Minister has said when they were announcing their 4th package of sanctions on Iran in relation to the violence on the 31st of October, and they said Canada will use all diplomatic tools at its disposal to respond to these brutal and unacceptable actions perpetrated by the Iranian regime. On the 26th of October, again, while announcing further sanctions, Secretary Blinken said those measures demonstrate our commitment to use all appropriate tools to hold all levels of the Iranian government to account. They are very strong statements from our allies, Minister. Why isn't Australia, which hasn't yet announced sanctions, using all of the diplomatic tools necessary to hold Iran accountable?
Well, you would know there are already sanctions, pre-existing sanctions on Iran.
But not specific to
but
what
there
we
are already
seeing
pre-existing sanctions on Iran. Well, I mean, you asked about diplomatic tools. Well, I'm happy for us to go through what we've done. One, in September, we raised concerns about the circumstances surrounding the death of Mahsa Amini and the violent crackdown on protests with the Iranian embassy. The 27th September, I issued a joint statement with Minister Gallagher condemning the crackdown. I made public calls via social media calling for a prompt, impartial, independent investigation into the death of Mahsa Amini. On the 30th September, we signed on as a nation to a joint statement of the 51st session of the UN Human Rights Council, denouncing Iranian authorities for the use of force. I again made a public statement via social media condemning the heavy-handed repression of protests and reports of violence against students on 10th of October. 13th of October, Australia delivered a statement to the UNGA Committee Interactive Dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders and called for an investigation of Mahsa Amini's death. The embassy was spoken to again on the 13th of October. On the 18th of October, we joined the Freedom Online Coalition's joint statement on internet shutdown in Iran. I provided a video statement after discussions with Melanie Joly, the Canadian Foreign Minister, and after engagement with her about a meeting, which unfortunately I was in the Pacific, so I couldn't get online to the meeting. So I said, can we do something else? So we agreed I'll do a video statement to the meeting, which I then publicly released, and I called on Iran to cease its suppression of women and suppression of protest, which we then put out on social media. The PM released a message condemning the death of Mahsa Amini and reiterating Australia's stand with the women and people of Iran. We delivered a further statement to the UNGA Third Committee on the Human Rights Situation in Iran on the 26th of October. We joined with our friends from Canada and New Zealand in expressing our grave concerns about the situation to the UNSC, including in relation to the UN Commission on the Status of Women. And I made that statement public on the 3rd of November. So there have been quite a lot of actions taken by the government.
Thank you, Chair. Just finally, and I will come back to this topic during the day, but I'm cognisant of sharing the call around. Minister, do you agree that Iranian individuals and entities that have been sanctioned by the US, by Canada and the United Kingdom for the involvement in the killing of women and girls deserve to be sanctioned?
I would not, it wouldn't be appropriate for me or any foreign minister to engage in speculation about potential listings in the public place. I would say the government's position about this issue, about the human rights abuses, is clear. I would make the point there are pre-existing sanctions which the past Labor government put on. I don't think there are any sanctions put on to Iran by the former coalition government. UNSC and autonomous sanctions, including against the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and a number of key IRGC officials. I would say to you, Senator, I do understand the call for further sanctions. We always assert publicly sanctions remain under active consideration. On this and other issues, you will understand that no foreign minister in this forum is going to be actively speculating on potential listings.
Okay. Just quickly, has the department provided any advice about whether Magnitsky sanctions could be applied to Iran?
Well, the question is under active consideration.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to go back to Iran. So, and Mr Innes-Brown in particular, I wanted to follow up on one of your responses earlier.
Sorry, who did you ask for?
Mr Innes-Brown, he's on the way.
Oh.
We discussed earlier some of the actions that have been taken in relation to the intimidation of the local Iranian community in Australia, and I've certainly heard from a number of people in that community that over the last weeks that they're concerned that their activities are being tracked or monitored by Iranian intelligence. I know the ABC reported last weekend that the family of an Iranian-Australian nurse living in Melbourne had been threatened by Iranian authorities, including 3 men visiting her father in Iran and telling him they would burn down his property if she didn't stop sharing information about human rights abuses in Iran online. So given your comments earlier, I'm interested to know what actions, aside from the representation to the Iranian embassy by DFAT, has the government taken to hold Iran account for this or for the violence that's been perpetrated against women and girls?
Sure, Senator. So it's something that we've engaged the Federal Police, Australian Federal Police, and I do know it has been reported back that members of the community have raised this issue with the New South Wales Police, who have looked into this. So that at the moment, that is the main activities. It's obviously something we're sort of still getting across the extent of it. What I would say from my own experience on Iran matters over a number of years is that Unfortunately, this is a practice of the Iranian regime. I know, for instance, the BBC Persian service, which is based out of London, a lot of their journalists over many years have had their families intimidated by the regime, who obviously do not like criticism or alternative views on reality being reported. So, unfortunately, this is a characteristic. They don't like dissent, internal or external, and it's something that we're obviously going to have to monitor closely and consider options. But.
So you are considering further actions that might be possible beyond just speaking with the embassy?
Yeah, well, that's, beg your pardon, the last... Sorry, Senator, can you just repeat the last...
I just said beyond raising those issues with the Iranian embassy.
He just talked about the AFP.
Yes, so that's...
Yeah, that's right, I'm talking to the AFP. So I guess this is sort of preliminary, I guess. We're just sort of working our way through the issue. I mean, I think we're going to have to... I mean, it's going to be... I imagine if it continues with something, we're going to have to continue the conversation with the Iranian embassy about, and so forth as a conduit for that those messages.
Well, what I would say to members of the diaspora is that if you if you have been harassed, if people are behaving towards you in ways which contravene Australia's laws, whether that be physical or other harassment, intimidation, we would support you in engaging with the Australian Federal Police about that, or the local police. This is an issue in a number of diaspora communities, as you know. We are a democracy. People are entitled to even if their views are not supported by particular regimes, and in whatever forum we should be asserting the right of protesters, researchers, whomever, in our democracy to express their views freely.
Minister, have you been specifically briefed on the extent of the Iranian covert activities in Australia?
I can't answer that in this forum.
Okay.
The government has a very clear view, as did, to be fair, both parties of government have a very clear view about the importance of safeguarding the Australian democracy, which includes diaspora communities being able to assert their views peacefully and freely.
Yep. And I appreciate your comments there, Minister. Thank you. I'll ask another question that, given the commentary today, I'm just trying to peel away a few layers here, and so if I get a response, I get one. If I don't, I recognise we've traversed these issues quite a bit. In regards to the specific individuals and entities that our allies have already sanctioned over recent weeks in relation to Iran, including the morality police, has the department identified any obstacles to Australia sanctioning those same entities and individuals?
I think that, Senator, I will refer back to the previous discussion. Okay. We won't be giving indications of future sanctions with respect to particular individuals.
Okay, but you haven't identified anything that would stop us doing it?
Well, I'm not prepared to really get any further into those questions, foreshadowing actions that may or may not be taken.
Okay, thank you, Ms Adams. And I just want to return to the Prime Minister's comment yesterday about considering business implications before implementing sanctions, and this is more of an operational question, I suppose, but which agency or part of government would be carrying out the consideration of business implications before we took, any action, regardless of whether it's sanctions or something else? Is that something that DFAT would concern itself with, or is it something that another department would do?
I think we would, government would consider all national interest implications. So, there's a range of interests that we have, including our diplomatic presence and others. So all factors would be taken into account. DFAT has a coordinating role in that.
A coordinating role? What? Could you elaborate as to what?
Well, as the Foreign Affairs and Trade Department, we would be the agency primarily making those, doing that work.
Yeah. And given the Prime Minister's comments yesterday, are you currently coordinating that work?
Regardless of any comments, assessments on the full range of national interests would, I mean, this is a hypothetical we're talking about here, would
Sorry,
be
Ms Adams.
evaluated.
The Prime Minister made a comment in question time yesterday in responding to a question in relation to this issue more broadly, that the business implications of potential actions were being considered. And so I'm just interested to know, is that actually currently occurring?
No,
Look, I can only reiterate that we would assess all implications.